WWE Evolution 2 is this weekend, and for an event that's been so hotly anticipated for years since the first edition in 2018, the show feels oddly rushed and frankly underwhelming. And that has nothing to do with the women involved in the show, mind you. The card overall looks really strong and has all the potential of being a really good event to rival that of the first, but still I can't shake the feeling that something about the show feels off, and I get the sense that that's a general consensus too. You see, Evolution 2018 came at a time where, across culture and the real world, actual tangible change felt like it was being made for women in a positive way. From the Me Too movement to Time's Up to discussions around equal pay and the inclusion and prominence of female stories across sport, music, television, films, and video games, for example. And of course in pro wrestling and specifically WWE, who are in the midst of their women's revolution, which had been building for years to the point that in 2018 we got the first Women's Royal Rumble, the first Women's Elimination Chamber, and finally the first all-women's pay-per-view in Evolution, which itself would be followed by the introduction of the Women's Tag Team Championships and the first Women's WrestleMania main event only a few months later. Now, though, years later, the positive feeling of progression has waned in both wrestling and in real life, with the feeling prevailing that we are going backwards in more ways than one. The progression towards equal rights for women feels more and more under attack, with online misogyny rampant and publicized by prominent male influencers, and AI only furthering this problem with its lack of legislation around the protection of women. Throw into that the anti-Me Too and cancel culture sentiment that is actively sought to delegitimize the female voices that aim to hold powerful abusers to account, and it's some of those same powerful abusers remaining in powerful and influential positions of power, rolling back the clock on women's rights, like in the case of the Roe v. Wade decision from 2022. And I'd love to separate all this from wrestling and pretend that art is separate from reality, but the truth is it isn't. The speaking out movement in wrestling followed suit from the likes of Me Too and Time's Up to call out abusers within the wrestling industry, but you could argue that the effects of that have been rolled back too, with the lack of follow-through on several allegations, cheapening the movement as a whole. Furthermore, the Vince McMahon allegations and WWE's culpability in that have shaken wrestling to its very core, and while WWE can claim to be a company that cares about progression, you can't have such a close-knit relationship with Donald Trump and the MAGA movement, or have Stephanie McMahon and Nick Khan speak of how much they love and respect Vince McMahon on one hand, and on the other, present a show that celebrates the women's revolution that they play an active part in covering up and undermining behind the scenes. Regardless of what you want to present on screen, if you're not following through off screen, it means absolutely nothing, and purely becomes virtue signaling nonsense that does nothing but pander to an audience with morals that you don't even believe in. And while not at all a surprise, it's a shame, because I'd love to celebrate Evolution 2 as the testament to the growing prominence of women's wrestling that it should be, but as long as the show takes place with the WWE logo on the banner, it will feel like nothing more than a hollow imitation of equality that it truly is, and that fucking sucks.